The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Elliot Reeves drank it anyway, grimacing as the bitter sludge hit his tongue. In the observation lounge of the United Earth Medical Station, cold coffee was a luxury. It meant things were quiet. It meant nobody was dying, at least not in the immediate, screaming on his surgical table kind of way. He'd learned to appreciate these moments, rare as they were on the frontier. Outside the reinforced viewport, Kepler 442b turned slowly beneath its amber sun, all rust-colored deserts and violet atmospheric storms. Beautiful, if you ignored the fact that the planet had tried to kill the first 3 colonial expeditions. The station orbited at a comfortable distance, close enough to provide medical support to the mining operations below, far enough that the radiation spikes wouldn't fry their systems every other week. Elliot was considering whether his bunk and 8 hours of unconsciousness might actually happen tonight when his comm chirped. The sound sent a familiar spike of adrenaline through his chest, the Pavlovian response of a trauma surgeon who'd spent 12 years in orbit around humanity's most optimistic mistakes. Reeves. He touched the device at his collar. "We've got incoming." Station Commander Wei's voice was tight, clipped. Diplomatic vessel took fire near the Talvari border. Multiple casualties. ETA 6 minutes. Elliot was already moving, dumping the coffee into a recycler and heading for the emergency bay. How many? Unclear. Could be 3, could be 30. And Elliot? Wei paused, and in that pause lived every complication Elliot didn't want to hear. At least one of them is Talvari. He stopped walking for exactly 2 seconds. You're joking. I really wish I was. The Talvari. Even the name carried weight, spoken in the hushed tones usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. Humanity had been reaching into the stars for 3 generations now, stumbling into a galactic neighborhood that was far more crowded than anyone had hoped. Most species were ambivalent about the new kids on the block. Some were friendly. The Talvari were neither. They simply existed at the edge of known space like a wall, perfect and impenetrable, watching with the patience of something that had never known defeat. Nobody touched the Talvari. It wasn't written law so much as survival instinct. Elliot pushed through the doors into the emergency bay where his team was already assembling. Santos, his medic, looked like he might throw up. The kid was good with human anatomy, less good with the weird diplomatic nightmares that came with frontier medicine. "Please tell me you've handled Talvari physiology," Santos said, his voice climbing half an octave. "I've read the literature." Elliot snapped on gloves, the synthetic material conforming to his hands with a soft hiss. "Which is about 3 paragraphs long because they don't exactly volunteer for medical studies. There are protocols. Cultural protocols. We're not supposed to." Santos. Elliot fixed him with the look that had steadied nervous residents for over a decade. "If someone's bleeding out on my table, I don't care if they're Talvari, Centaurian, or the ghost of my ex-wife. We stop the bleeding first, apologize for the cultural insensitivity later. Clear?" Santos swallowed hard. "Clear." The bay doors blew open with a pressure differential that popped Elliot's ears. Emergency teams rushed in with gurneys, and for a moment everything was controlled chaos, the organized disaster of triage. 2 humans, both conscious, one with a compound fracture that made Elliot wince, the other with burns across her torso. Serious but manageable. He started delegating, sending them to treatment rooms, when the 3rd gurney came through. Elliot had seen a lot in 12 years. Bodies broken by explosive decompression, flesh melted by plasma fire, the creative ways the universe found to remind humans they were fragile. But he'd never seen anything quite like her. She was tall, taller than him by several inches, and even unconscious and broken, she looked dangerous. Her armor was some kind of adaptive weave, dark as space itself, but it had been shredded by whatever had hit her, peeling back to reveal the body beneath. She was humanoid in all the ways that mattered, but there was something in the proportions that was just slightly off, slightly too perfect, like someone had taken human anatomy and optimized it. Her skin was pale, almost luminous under the harsh emergency lights, and her hair, dark and matted with blood, fell across a face that would have been unremarkable except for the ears that swept back from her skull in elegant points. And she was dying. "Talk to me," Elliot barked, moving alongside the gurney as they rushed her toward the surgical suite. "Puncture wound, left thorax. Possible tension pneumothorax. BP dropping. She's been unconscious since we pulled her from the wreck." The EMT was reading off a scanner, his hands shaking slightly. "Doc, I don't know if we should. Get her on the table. Now." The surgical suite was already prepped, sterile and cold and bathed in the blue-white glow of overhead lights. They transferred her with practiced efficiency, and Elliot got his first clear look at the damage. The puncture wound was low, between the fourth and fifth rib by human standards, and when he placed his hand near it, he could feel the wrongness, the way her chest moved asymmetrically. "Collapsed lung," he confirmed. "Santos, I need a chest tube kit. And get me a metabolic scan, I need to know how her biochemistry compares to baseline human." "Doctor," Santos hesitated at the instrument tray. "The protocols. Her people, they have rules about physical contact. Something about mates and..." "Santos, I will worry about their marriage customs after I stop her from drowning in her own blood. Move." The kid moved. Elliot worked quickly, his hands steady despite the caffeine withdrawal headache forming behind his eyes. The metabolic scan came back showing architecture that was familiar enough to work with: oxygen-based respiration, carbon-based biochemistry, hemoglobin that was nearly identical to human but with a higher binding affinity. Efficient. Everything about her was efficient, from the bone density that showed up on the imaging like she'd been reinforced with composite materials, to the muscle tissue that was striated in ways that suggested strength far beyond human norms. Someone had engineered this woman's ancestors for war. He cut away more of the armor, the material resisting his trauma shears, until he switched to a plasma scalpel. But she woke on the third day, and Elliot knew immediately because every alarm in the recovery ward started screaming at once. He was in his office, 3 doors down, trying to convince his third cup of station coffee that it wanted to be consciousness instead of liquid regret. The alarm sent him running, still holding the mug, his chair spinning lazily behind him in the low-gravity section. The recovery ward was chaos. Santos had his back pressed against the monitoring station, eyes wide, while 2 security officers were trying very hard to look authoritative while also keeping their distance from the bed. In the bed, the Talvari woman was sitting upright, one hand gripping the 4 lines she'd just torn out, the other reaching for weapons that weren't there. Her eyes found Elliot the moment he came through the door. They were amber, flecked with gold, and they tracked him with the focus of a predator deciding whether something was food or threat. "Everyone out," Elliot said calmly, setting his coffee down on the nearest surface. "Except Santos. Santos stays." "Doctor, protocol suggests," one of the security officers began. "Protocol suggests you let me do my job, which is harder when I'm tripping over armed personnel. Out." They went, reluctantly, and Elliot approached the bed with his hands visible, moving the way he'd learned to move around frightened animals and trauma patients having flashbacks. Slowly. Predictably. With absolutely no sudden gestures that might get him killed. "My name is Dr. Elliot Reeves," he said, keeping his voice level. "You're on the United Earth Medical Station in orbit around Kepler 442b. You were injured in an attack on a diplomatic vessel. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She stared at him for a long moment, and he watched her process the information, watched the soldier's assessment happen behind those unsettling eyes. When she spoke, her voice was rough from intubation, but the words were clear, her accent turning the universal language into something formal and sharp. "I understand. I am Kaya, 3rd blade of the 7th Talon. Where are my warriors? The 2 humans from your vessel are recovering in another ward. You were the only Talvari casualty we received." Something flickered across her face, too fast to read, and then it was gone, replaced by that blank warrior's mask. She was trying to stand, and Elliot could see the moment the pain hit, the way her breath caught and her hand went to her side where he'd repaired the puncture wound. "I need you to stay in bed," Elliot said. "You had a collapsed lung, severe tissue damage, and burns across." "Who touched me?" The question came out flat, cold, and it stopped Elliot mid-sentence. "I'm sorry. During the surgery. Who touched me?" Her eyes locked onto his, and there was something in them now that made his stomach drop. Not anger, exactly. Something worse. Something like fear wearing anger's clothing. "I did. I'm the trauma surgeon. I performed the operation that saved your life." Kaya went very still. It was the stillness of deep water before a storm, the kind that made you want to check your escape routes. When she moved again, it was fast, swinging her legs off the bed despite the monitors shrieking their protests. She made it 2 steps before her knees buckled, and Elliot caught her on instinct, his hands on her arms, steadying her. She recoiled from his touch like he'd burned her. "Don't." The word came out strangled. "Don't touch me again." Elliot stepped back, hands raised. "Okay. No touching. Understood. But you need to get back in bed before you tear something I spent 4 hours repairing." She was shaking now, barely perceptible tremors running through her frame, and he couldn't tell if it was from pain or something else entirely. Behind him, Santos made a small, worried noise. "Doctor," Santos whispered. "The protocols. I tried to tell you." "What protocols?" Elliot kept his eyes on Kaya. "Talk to me. What's happening here?" Kaya had made it back to the bed, sitting on its edge with her hand pressed to her side. The hospital gown they'd put her in was too small, ending mid-thigh, and Elliot could see the way her muscles were locked, every line of her body screaming tension. "Among my people," she said, each word carefully controlled, "there are laws. Old laws, written into us before memory. A warrior's body is their own. None may see it unarmored. None may touch bare skin. These things are reserved for," she stopped, her jaw clenching. "For one's bonded mate. Only them. No other." The silence that followed was the kind that preceded very bad news in Elliot's experience. He'd heard it before biopsies came back positive, before he had to tell families their loved ones hadn't made it. This was that kind of silence. "I was unconscious," Kaya continued, her voice dropping lower. "You removed my armor. You saw me. You touched me. You performed the surgery with your hands on my skin. To save your life," Elliot said slowly, feeling the ground shifting under him in ways that had nothing to do with station rotation. "Yes." She finally looked at him again, and this time he could read what was in her eyes. Resentment. Confusion. And underneath it all, something that looked almost like betrayal. "To save my life, you have done something that, among my people, means only one thing. You have claimed me as mate. Whether you knew it or not. Whether you meant to or not." Santos made a sound like a small animal dying. Elliot felt his brain trying to process what he'd just heard and failing spectacularly. He'd been divorced twice. Once because he'd worked too much, once because he'd apparently not worked enough, and both times the universe had been very clear that he was bad at relationships. The idea that he'd accidentally gotten engaged to an alien warrior woman while trying to save her life would have been funny if she didn't look so deadly serious. That's... He stopped, started again. "That has to be a misunderstanding. I'm a doctor. I perform emergency surgery. That's just medicine, not. It does not matter what you call it." Kaya's voice was hard now, armor sliding back into place. "Among my people, what you have done creates a bond. It is recognized in our laws, in our biology. I am bound to you now, whether either of us wishes it." Elliot ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that usually helped him think through complex surgical cases but was doing absolutely nothing for this particular crisis. "Okay. Let's everyone take a breath here. This is clearly some kind of cultural confusion. We can figure this out. There has to be some kind of opt-out clause, some way to. There is no opting out. Kaya stood again, steadier this time, and Elliot noticed that even injured, even in a hospital gown that was fundamentally undignified, she radiated danger. The bond is neurochemical. Phenomenal. My ancestors engineered it into our species millennia ago, to ensure unit cohesion in war. Once formed, it does not break easily. Engineered. Elliot latched onto the word. So this is biological. Programmable. There has to be a way to reverse it, some kind of medical intervention. You do not understand. She took a step toward him, and he held his ground despite every instinct screaming that apex predators required personal space. My people do not negotiate with biology. We are what we were made to be. Warriors. And the mate bond is what keeps us from being nothing but weapons. The anger in her voice was complex, layered with things Elliot didn't have the context to understand. He'd spent his career learning to read people, to see past what they said to what they meant, but Kaya was a closed book written in a language he'd never studied. So what happens now? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm, professional, like this was just another complicated case he needed to solve. Now. Kaya's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. Now I cannot return to my unit. Cannot return to my people. I am bound to you, human, to someone who does not even understand what that means. By saving my life, you have ended it. She moved toward the door, still unsteady but clearly intending to leave, and Elliot found himself stepping into her path without thinking. The Talvari delegation arrived 4 hours after Kaya refused to leave the station, and they brought with them the kind of diplomatic tension that made Elliot nostalgic for simple things like hemorrhagic shock and compound fractures. He watched them dock from the observation deck, their ship a sleek predatory thing that moved through space like it was hunting. Commander Wei stood beside him, her normally unflappable demeanor showing cracks around the edges. Tell me you have a plan, Wei said. I have several plans. None of them are good. Elliot took another sip of coffee, his 5th cup of the day, which probably explained why his hands had a slight tremor. Plan A is we explain this was a medical emergency and hope they understand. Plan B is we run very fast in opposite directions and hope they only chase one of us. Elliot. I'm working on a plan C, but it mostly involves faking my own death and assuming a new identity on a mining colony in the outer reaches. Wei pinched the bridge of her nose in the universal gesture of command staff who regretted their life choices. The Talvari don't have a reputation for flexibility. Or forgiveness. Or really anything that would make this situation less catastrophic. Hey, I saved one of their warriors. That has to count for something. You also apparently married her according to their customs. Accidentally married her, Elliot corrected. There's a distinction. I'm sure they'll appreciate the nuance while they're deciding whether to start an incident. The delegation consisted of 5 Talvari, all in full armor that made them look like they'd stepped out of humanity's darkest war fantasies. They moved in perfect synchronization, a single unit responding to commands Elliot couldn't hear. At their center walked someone who radiated authority the way stars radiated heat, a tall figure whose armor was marked with sigils that probably meant something terrifying. Station security met them at the airlock, and Elliot watched the brief exchange of credentials and hostile pleasantries that constituted first contact diplomacy. Then they were moving through the station, heading directly for the medical ward, and Elliot realized with a sinking feeling that Plan C was looking more attractive by the minute. He made it to the ward 30 seconds before the delegation did, found Kaya sitting on the edge of her bed, now wearing what looked like spare maintenance coveralls that were still too small for her frame. She looked up when he entered, and something complicated passed across her face. They're here, he said. I know. She stood, and he could see the effort it cost her, the way she locked her knees to keep from swaying. I can feel them. Unit sense. We always know when our talon is near. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and the Talvari entered like a military operation, securing corners and exits before their commander stepped through. He was older than Kaya, his face marked with scars that spoke of battles won through survival rather than skill. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed instantly. "Third Blade Kaya. You will return with us immediately." Kaya's spine straightened, her posture shifting into something formal and military. "Commander Virex. I cannot." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Elliot became acutely aware that he was the only human in the room who wasn't armed, which seemed like a significant oversight in retrospect. "You cannot," Virex repeated, the words flat and dangerous. "Or you will not." "Both." "Neither." Kaya's jaw clenched. "The bond has been formed. To return without resolution would bring dishonor to the Talon, to our people. You know the law." Virex's eyes, dark and cold, slid from Kaya to Elliot. The assessment was brief, thorough, and apparently finding Elliot wanting in every measurable category. "This human performed emergency medical procedures," Virex said. "There was no intent to claim. No understanding of our ways. The bond is invalid. The bond does not care about intent." Kaya's voice was steady, but Elliot could hear the tremor underneath. "It exists. I can feel it. Every moment he is near, my biology responds. The ancestors built this into us, Commander. We do not get to choose when it is convenient." Virex moved closer to Elliot, and every instinct honed by millions of years of evolution suggested that standing still was a bad idea. Elliot stood still anyway, mostly because his legs had forgotten how movement worked. "You," Virex said, the word carrying enough contempt to fill a cargo bay. "Do you understand what you have done?" "I saved her life," Elliot managed, pleased that his voice only shook a little. "Where I come from, that's generally considered a good thing. Where you come from, you do not engineer your species for war. You do not carry the weight of genetic law. You are children playing with fire and wondering why you burn." "Okay, that's fair," Elliot said, because arguing with angry alien commanders seemed like a poor survival strategy. "But in my defense, she was dying. I had maybe 15 minutes to make a decision, and let the patient die to avoid cultural complications wasn't really in my Hippocratic oath." One of the other Talvari made a sound, quickly cut off. Virex's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, a recalculation happening behind those dark eyes. "The severance," Virex said finally, turning back to Kaya. "It can be performed. The bond can be broken." Kaya went very still. "The severance leaves scars. Neural damage. Memory loss. You would have me return diminished, Commander. I would have you return functional. A warrior with a mate bond to a human is no warrior at all." "Hey," Elliot interjected, because apparently his survival instincts had completely abandoned him. "I'm standing right here. And I'm pretty sure there's a less insulting way to conduct diplomatic negotiations." Virex ignored him completely, which was probably the kindest thing that had happened to Elliot all day. "You have two options, Third Blade. The severance, performed by our medical caste, which will sever the bond and allow you to return to your unit. Or you remain bound to this human, accept the consequences, and live with the dishonor of a bond formed in ignorance. There's no third option." Elliot asked, and this time Virex did look at him, the kind of look that suggested he was considering whether murder would cause more problems than it solved. "The third option," Virex said slowly, like explaining basic concepts to a child, "is that you accept the bond. You leave your life, your people, your world, and integrate into Talvari society as Kaya's mate. You undergo the trials, you learn our ways, you become one of us." He paused. "This has never been done with a human. The probability of your survival is negligible. So my choices are brain surgery that might turn Kaya into a vegetable, walking away and leaving her dishonored, or joining alien warrior society and probably dying in whatever trials you people use as a screening process." "Yes. Those are terrible options, Elliot said. I'm formally requesting option 4, we all pretend this never happened and go our separate ways like reasonable adults. The look Kaya gave him was complicated, mixing frustration with something that might have been hope if hope came with teeth. The bond does not allow pretending, she said quietly. It is not a contract to be negotiated. It is neurochemistry. Pheromones. Right now, my body knows you are near. My heart rate increases. My focus narrows. Parts of my brain that are supposed to be under conscious control are firing without permission. And from the way you keep looking at me when you think I do not notice, you feel it too. Elliot opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again, because she was right. He'd been noticing things he shouldn't, the way she moved, the cadence of her breathing, the particular gold flecks in her amber eyes. He'd been chalking it up to professional medical observation, but professional medical observation didn't usually come with an elevated pulse and an inexplicable urge to stand closer. This is insane, he said finally. I don't even know you. You don't know me. We're from different species, different worlds, different everything. There has to be a rational solution here. Rationality, Vyrek said, is a luxury of species who did not engineer themselves into weapons. We are Talvari. We are what we were made to be. And what we were made to be does not allow for convenient solutions. Commander Wei chose that moment to enter, flanked by station security who looked deeply uncomfortable being in the same room as this much potential violence. She assessed the situation with the speed of someone who'd commanded stations in 3 different star systems and learned to read trouble in multiple languages. Gentlemen, ladies, warriors of various species, she said, her command voice cutting through the tension. I'm going to suggest we table this discussion until everyone has had time to cool down and consult with their respective governments. This station is neutral ground, and I prefer it stay that way. There is nothing to discuss, Vyrek said. The third blade will make her choice. Severance or dishonor. Or, Elliot heard himself say, surprising everyone including himself, she could give me some time to actually understand what this bond means. Let me talk to her. Learn about your people. Make an informed decision instead of just reacting to a crisis. Vyrek stared at him for a long moment. You would delay. I would avoid making a decision that affects someone else. The observation lounge at 0300 station time was empty except for Elliot and Kaya, which was either very good planning or very bad judgment. Elliot hadn't decided which yet. He'd brought coffee for himself and something the station synthesizer claimed was compatible with Talvari biochemistry for her. She took it with obvious suspicion, sniffed it once, and set it down untouched. It's probably terrible, Elliot admitted. Station coffee is bad enough for humans. I can't imagine what it does to alien taste buds. We do not have taste buds in the way you mean. Kaya sat with perfect posture despite her injuries, hands folded in her lap like she was at a formal military briefing. Our ancestors optimized away many pleasures. Efficiency was more important than enjoyment. That sounds deeply depressing. That sounds like survival. They'd been doing this for 2 days now, these careful conversations that circled around a massive thing neither of them wanted to name directly. Kaya would tell him fragments about Talvari culture, about the genetic wars that had forced her people to turn themselves into living weapons. Elliot would respond with stories about human chaos, about the messy contradictions that somehow kept his species stumbling forward. It felt like 2 people trying to build a bridge while standing on opposite cliffs, neither quite sure if the gap was crossable. Tell me about the bond, Elliot said finally, because dancing around it was getting exhausting. The neurochemistry part. How does it actually work? Kaya was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the viewport where Kepler 442b turned below them, all storms and rust-colored promises. My ancestors were losing a war, she said. Thousands of years ago, before we had star travel, before we had anything but desperation and intelligence. The enemy was everywhere, adapting faster than we could fight. So my people made a choice. They took themselves apart at the genetic level and rebuilt what they found. Genetic engineering on that scale would take generations. It took 7 generations of children born in laboratories, their DNA rewritten, their brains restructured. They made us stronger, faster, more resilient. But strength alone was not enough. Warriors need cohesion. They need trust. So they engineered the mate bond. Elliot sipped his coffee, which had gone cold again, listening. The bond is triggered by extended physical contact, especially during moments of vulnerability, Kaya continued. When your hands were on my skin, repairing damage, keeping me alive, my limbic system interpreted this as profound trust. As mate-level intimacy. It released cascades of neurochemicals. Oxytocin analogs. Dopamine. Compounds that have no name in your language because your species does not produce them. And those chemicals just lock in. Permanently. Not permanently. But reversing them requires the severance, which involves neural ablation of the bonding centers. It works. But it takes parts of you with it. Memory. Emotional range. The ability to form deep attachments. She finally looked at him. Warriors who undergo severance are effective. But they are not whole. Elliot set his coffee down, processing. So your options are stay bonded to me, which apparently violates about 1,000 cultural taboos, or become a partial lobotomy patient. Those are really the only choices. Unless you choose to accept the bond. To integrate into Talvari society. The thing where I probably die in trials designed for genetically engineered supersoldiers. That option. The corner of Kaya's mouth twitched. Over the past 2 days, Elliot had learned to read that as her version of amusement, a tightly controlled crack in the warrior facade. The trials are not designed to kill, she said. Just to test. Strength, endurance, tactical thinking, pain tolerance. Oh good, just pain tolerance. That's my best subject. Right after, bleeding to death and catastrophic trauma. You are a doctor. You have faced pain. You have made decisions under pressure. These things matter more than physical strength. Kaya, I'm a surgeon. The most athletic thing I do is stand for 18 hours during a complex procedure. I once threw out my back reaching for a dropped scalpel. I am the opposite of warrior material. She studied him with those amber eyes, and he felt that pull again, the thing he'd been trying to ignore. The way his attention kept getting drawn to her, the way his body seemed to have opinions about proximity that his brain definitely hadn't approved. You ran into a room full of armed Talvari to check on me, she said quietly. You stood between me and Virex, despite knowing he could break you without effort. You fight, Doctor. Just not with weapons. Yeah, well, fighting with words and poor impulse control isn't going to help me survive whatever warrior boot camp your people have planned. Perhaps not. She reached for the drink he brought her, took a cautious sip, and made a face that suggested station synthesizers were equally terrible across species lines. But it might help you survive me. Are you threatening me or flirting? I genuinely cannot tell. The question surprised a laugh out of her, brief and sharp and entirely unexpected. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less like a weapon and more like a person. I do not know how to flirt, she admitted. The Talvari do not court. We train, we fight, we bond when biology chooses. There is no. What is your word? Romance? Yeah, we're big on romance. Hearts, flowers, awkward dinner conversations where you both pretend to like the same food. It's a whole thing. That sounds inefficient. It absolutely is. But it's also kind of nice. Getting to know someone slowly. Making choices instead of having biology make them for you. Kaya looked down at her hands, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed uncertain. I did not choose this. You did not choose this. But it is happening anyway. I can feel it, Doctor. Every moment you are near, my focus narrows. My pulse quickens. Parts of my brain that should be under conscious control are not. And I hate it. The raw honesty in her voice made Elliot's chest tighten. He'd been thinking of this as his problem, his crisis, his accidental marriage to an alien warrior. But Kaya was trapped too, maybe more than he was. At least he could walk away. She'd lose pieces of herself either way. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. I was trying to save your life, not trap you in some kind of biochemical arranged marriage. I know. Which makes it worse, somehow. If you had been malicious, I could hate you cleanly. But you were just being what you are. A healer. Someone who sees a broken thing and tries to fix it. Is that what you are? A broken thing? Her eyes flashed. I am a warrior of the 7th Talon. I have fought in 12 campaigns across 6 systems. I am not broken. Good. Because I've got to be honest, I don't think I could handle trying to fix a genetically engineered super soldier. Regular humans are complicated enough. They sat in silence for a while, watching the planet turn. Elliot's brain was trying to process the impossible math of the situation. 3 days ago, his biggest problem had been chronic coffee dependency and a schedule that looked like punishment for war crimes. Now he was sitting in an observation lounge at 3 in the morning, discussing neurochemistry and cultural taboos with a woman who could probably bench press him without breaking a sweat. Can I ask you something? Kaya said finally. Sure. Why did you ask for 3 days? Why not just let Virex take me for the severance? It would be simpler. You could return to your life. I could return to my unit. Everything could go back to how it was. Elliot thought about it, tried to find an answer that made sense, and came up empty. Finally, he settled for honesty. Because you looked terrified when he suggested it. And I'm really bad at watching people be scared of medical procedures. I am not afraid of pain. I know. You're afraid of losing parts of yourself. That's different. That's worse. He met her eyes. And maybe because in the past 2 days, you've told me about the genetic wars, about how your ancestors built you, about what it means to carry that history in your DNA. And I kind of want to know what else you'd tell me if we had more time. Something shifted in her expression, something soft and dangerous at once. That is curiosity, Doctor. Not a foundation for a mate bond. Maybe. Or maybe curiosity is how humans decide who to let close. We ask questions. We listen. We figure out if we want someone around for the long term based on whether their answers make us want to ask more questions. And do they? My answers? Elliot considered lying, considered deflecting with humor the way he usually did when conversations got too real. But Kaya had been painfully honest with him, had stripped away the warrior armor at least verbally, and she deserved the same. Yeah, he said. They do. Which is either really good or really bad, and I haven't figured out which yet. She smiled then, a real smile, and it was like watching sunrise on a planet he'd never visited. That makes 2 of us. His calm chirped, breaking the moment. Santos's voice came through, tinny and apologetic. Doc. Sorry to interrupt your sleep cycle, but we've got an incoming message. Priority channel. It's marked urgent. Elliot exchanged a glance with Kaya. Put it through. The holographic display activated, showing Commander Wei's face, and she looked worried in a way that made Elliot's stomach drop. We've got a situation, Wei said without preamble. Long-range scanners picked up a ship on intercept course. Military configuration. And Elliot? It's broadcasting Talvari separatist codes. They're not here for diplomacy. The attack came during Gamma shift, when half the station was asleep and the other half was pretending coffee counted as consciousness. Elliot was in the emergency bay running diagnostics on equipment he hoped he wouldn't need when the station lurched sideways and every alarm started screaming. Kaya was beside him instantly, moving with a speed that made his doctor brain catalog all the healing tissue she was definitely straining. She'd insisted on staying close after Wei's warning, and Elliot had stopped arguing about proper patient recovery protocols somewhere around the second day of their strange truce. "They're targeting the docking ports," she said, her head tilted like she was listening to something he couldn't hear. "Separatist tactics. They want to board, not destroy. Why is that not comforting?" Elliot grabbed the emergency medical kit, years of frontier station experience kicking in. "And how do you know that?" "Because I trained with some of them before they broke away. They believe the mate bond makes us weak. Controllable. They want to prove it by eliminating bonded warriors." She looked at him, and her eyes were sharp, focused, every inch the soldier. "They are here for me. Which means they will come through you to get to me." Again, not comforting. The station shuddered again, and through the viewport Elliot could see the separatist ship, all angles and aggression, latching onto the station like a parasite. Wei's voice came over the station-wide comm, remarkably calm for someone announcing an armed boarding. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We have hostile forces attempting to breach. Security teams to docking ports. Medical staff, prepare for casualties. And someone find me Dr. Reeves and our Talvari guest before." The comm cut out as something exploded 3 sections over. "We need to move," Kaya said. "The maintenance corridors. They will expect us to run to security or the command center. We do the opposite. I'm a doctor, not a tactical genius, but I'm pretty sure running away from help during an armed attack is a terrible plan. The separatists want me to run to security. They want me to follow protocol. Warriors who follow protocol are predictable." She grabbed his arm, and he felt that jolt again, the bond asserting itself at the worst possible moment. Warriors who survive are not. They ran. The maintenance corridors were a maze of recycled air and forgotten equipment, the places station engineers went to fix problems and station personnel went to avoid. Kaya navigated them like she'd memorized the layout, which she probably had because of course she had. Behind them, Elliot could hear sounds that suggested station security was having a very bad shift. "Tell me you have a plan that's more detailed than run and hope," Elliot gasped, because apparently 4 years of medical school and a decade of surgery had not prepared him for cardio. "I have a plan. They want me isolated. Separated from my unit, from support. They expect fear, confusion." She stopped at a junction, listening, then pulled him down a side corridor. "They do not expect me to have a tactical advantage." "What tactical advantage? You're recovering from major surgery and I'm a doctor whose only combat training was a very aggressive game of hospital politics. You know this station. Every corridor, every system. You have been here 3 years. 2 years. And that doesn't make me. And I am Talvari. I was bred for war. Together, we are not what they expect." The logic was insane, except it wasn't, not entirely. Elliot did know the station. He knew which corridors had emergency medical caches, which sections could be sealed remotely, which routes maintenance used when they needed to move quickly. And Kaya, even injured, moved like violence given form. They nearly ran straight into the first separatist at Junction 7 Charlie. He was taller than Kaya, his armor marked with symbols that probably meant something threatening, and he had a weapon that looked like it could remove limbs with prejudice. Kaya moved before Elliot's brain finished processing threat. She went low, inside the separatist's guard, and did something with her hands that made the warrior's knee bend in a direction knees were not designed to bend. The weapon clattered to the deck. "Medical cache," she snapped at Elliot. "Sedatives. Now." He was moving before conscious thought caught up, muscle memory from 1,000 emergencies taking over. The cache was 2 panels down, biometric sealed, and his hands were shaking as he pulled out the sedative injector. Kaya had the separatist on the ground, one arm locked around his throat in a hold that was probably cutting off blood flow to the brain. Elliot injected the sedative, watched the warrior go limp, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that he just participated in what was technically assault. That was terrifying, he said. That was efficient. Kaya took the fallen weapon, checked its charge, and handed it to him. Do you know how to use this? I'm a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm. The oath has an exception for self-defense, yes. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but I'm also pretty sure the ancient Greeks didn't anticipate alien separatist boarding parties. He took the weapon anyway, holding it like it might explode. Please tell me we're not going to encounter more of them. We are definitely going to encounter more of them. They encountered 3 more in the next 10 minutes, and Elliot learned that combat in maintenance corridors was nothing like the heroic battles in entertainment feeds. It was cramped, brutal, and terrifyingly quick. Kaya fought with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful, each strike precise and devastating. Elliot mostly tried not to shoot himself in the foot and used his intimate knowledge of station systems to seal bulkheads, trigger emergency protocols, and generally make life difficult for anyone trying to kill them. By the time they reached the environmental control hub, Elliot's hands had stopped shaking and started just accepting that this was his life now. Why here? He asked as Kaya sealed the door behind them. Because from here we can control air pressure, temperature, gravity in half the station. And because, she moved to the console, her fingers flying over controls, I can send a signal to Commander Vyrex's ship. The Separatists are jamming standard communications, but environmental systems run on different frequencies. You're calling for backup. I am calling my Talon. They will come. She was right. 5 minutes later, the station shuddered with the force of a new ship docking, and this time the alarms sang a different tune. Elliot watched through the security feeds as Vyrex and his warriors cut through the Separatists like they were teaching a lesson in efficiency. It was over in minutes, the kind of clean military operation that made everything Elliot and Kaya had done look like improvisation. Which it had been. When Vyrex found them in the environmental hub, Kaya was sitting against the wall, finally allowing herself to show the exhaustion and pain she'd been ignoring. Elliot was checking her vitals with a handheld scanner, his doctor brain cataloging stress fractures and torn sutures and a dozen other things she'd need treatment for. Third blade, Vyrex said, and something in his voice was different. Softer, maybe. Or as soft as Talvari warriors got. You fought well. I fought with what I had, Commander. Vyrex looked at Elliot, and the assessment was thorough. The human knows station systems. He adapted quickly. He did not panic. A pause. He fought beside you as a mate unit would. Kaya's hand found Elliot's, and the touch sent that familiar spark through him, the bond humming approval. He did, she said quietly. Vyrex was silent for a long moment, and Elliot could see the calculation happening behind those dark eyes, the recalibration of expectations and protocols. The Separatists came because they believe the mate bond is weakness, Vyrex said finally. They believe bonded warriors cannot fight effectively. Today, you have proven them wrong. Together, you were more effective than either would have been alone. He straightened, and it felt like a pronouncement. The bond will be recognized. But it will be recognized as what it proved to be today, a tactical advantage. You will not be required to leave your world, human. And Third Blade Kaya will not be required to undergo severance. You will become something new. A bridge between our peoples. Proof that the old laws can adapt. Elliot felt Kaya's hand tighten on his, felt the relief flowing through her like a physical thing. There is one condition, Vyrex continued. You will both undergo evaluation. Prove that this bond can be maintained across species lines. Prove that it strengthens rather than weakens. He looked at Kaya. And you, Third Blade, will teach your mate to fight properly. What I saw in those security feeds was deeply inadequate. Hey, Elliot protested. I kept us alive. You ran in circles and hoped for the best. Strategic circles. There's a difference. Kaya laughed, the sound surprising them all. She pulled Elliot closer, and he didn't resist, just let himself be drawn into her orbit. "I will teach him," she said. "If he teaches me human customs in return." I believe he mentioned something about hearts and flowers and awkward conversations. I'm already regretting that conversation. Too late, Doctor. The bond chooses, remember. And apparently, it chose someone who cannot even shoot straight. I'm a doctor, not a soldier. You are both now, Virex said. Both, or neither. That is what the mate bond